The first time she saw her father in court, she barely recognized him. But the moment their eyes met, old memories came flooding back. Memories tied to a night her mother vanished without a trace. What she revealed on the stand would shake the courtroom to its core, and uncover a secret buried deep inside a Thai temple. And trust me, what comes next will leave you speechless. If you want to know the chilling truth behind James Craig's daughter's testimony, watch this video till the very end. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your idea might be our next case. The first time she saw him in the courtroom, James Craig didn't look like the man she remembered calling father. The fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows on his face, hollowing out his eyes, making his jaw seem sharper, colder. She froze at the doorway, her breath caught between anger and disbelief, the sound of her heels echoing on the polished floor. He turned, slow and deliberate, and for a moment, it was as if the years between them had vanished. The smell of lemongrass soup and jasmine rice from her childhood kitchen flashed in her mind. Her Thai mother stirring the pot, her father smiling like nothing in the world could break them. But that was before the lies. Before the night that changed everything. Reporters lined the benches, pens scratching, cameras clicking softly like whispers. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final, and the air in the room shifted. James's eyes didn't leave hers. Not when the prosecutor began reading the charges. Not when the jury avoided her gaze. She clenched the silver bracelet on her wrist, the one her mother had given her before she died. It was the only piece of home she had left. Her father had taken the rest, the trust, the family name, the safety. Now all she had was the truth. "Miss Craig," the attorney's voice pulled her forward. "Please take the stand." The wood of the witness box was cool under her fingertips as she swore the oath. From where she sat, she could see every line on her father's face, each one carved by choices she still didn't understand. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. The first question was simple. The second one wasn't. And somewhere, deep in her chest, she realized, if she answered honestly, she might destroy him. If she didn't, she might destroy herself. She gripped the edge of the stand, knuckles pale against the varnished wood. The attorney repeated the question, slower this time, as if giving her one last chance to change her mind. Her gaze locked on her father's. There was no apology in his eyes, no flicker of regret, only that same unshakable calm that had terrified her as a child when she'd done something wrong. Her throat tightened. The smell of incense from her mother's shrine filled her memory, the way the soft chants used to echo through their small California home. Her mother had taught her about truth, that it was like water, clear, necessary, and impossible to hold back forever. But truth also had weight, and hers felt like it could crush her. The jury leaned forward as she opened her mouth. Her father's lips moved slightly, as if he were mouthing words only she could hear. She thought she saw him form her Thai name, the one he hadn't spoken in years. It hit her like a punch. For a split second, she was 10 again, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor. Her father laughing as he helped her fold banana leaves for steaming rice cakes. Then the moment shattered. She remembered the file folder she had found in his desk drawer. The photographs, the signatures, the single, undeniable link between him and the night her mother never came home. Her voice trembled on the first syllable. But before she could speak, he leaned forward, his lawyer's hand gripping his arm. And in the stillness that followed, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The judge's eyes flicked from her to James, a faint crease forming between his brows. "Mr. Craig, control yourself," he warned, but the words barely cut through the heavy silence. Her father didn't look at the judge. He kept his eyes on her, steady and unblinking, like he was willing her to stop. She swallowed hard, the courtroom fading in and out of focus. Her fingers brushed the edge of the silver bracelet again, feeling the tiny engraved lotus petals. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, soft, accented, unwavering. "Don't let fear decide for you." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Miss Craig, please answer the question." Her lips parted, but the words caught somewhere between her chest and her tongue. She could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the shuffle of papers, the creak of a chair in the back row. Every sound felt magnified, pressing against her skull. James shifted in his seat, and she caught it, the smallest twitch of his jaw, the kind he used to make when he was about to lie. And that was when she realized he wasn't afraid of the truth coming out. He was afraid of how she was going to tell it. She took a breath that felt like it might tear her lungs apart. "The night my mother disappeared," she began, her voice low but steady, "my father wasn't where he said he was." Gasps rippled through the room. Her father's lawyer shot up from his chair. "Objection." But the judge didn't answer immediately. He was watching her, closely, like he knew there was more. And there was. Much more. Enough to unravel everything her father had built. Enough to drag old ghosts into the light. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Because the next thing she was about to say would not only change the verdict. It would change the way everyone in that room saw her forever. She could feel every eye in the courtroom on her. Heat prickling at the back of her neck. The attorney leaned closer. His voice calm but insistent. "Miss Craig. What do you mean by that?" Her father's fingers drummed once against the defense table, slow and deliberate, like a warning only she would catch. But she didn't look at him now. She looked at the jurors, faces tense, pens hovering over notepads, as if they were holding on to her next breath. She thought of the rainy night years ago, the sound of tires crunching wet gravel outside their house, the faint glow of headlights through the curtains. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, homework spread out, when the front door creaked open and her father stepped in. His jacket was damp, his shoes muddy, and his eyes, colder than she'd ever seen them. "I saw him," she said finally, her voice breaking but loud enough for the microphones to catch. Her father froze. "In the alley behind the Thai grocery store on 8th Street. The one my mother used to shop at." A murmur rippled through the room, reporters scribbling furiously. The prosecutor stepped forward, sensing the shift. "And what was he doing there, Miss Craig?" Her grip on the bracelet tightened until it bit into her skin. She hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way it had never been before. "He was with her," she whispered. The room stilled. "My mother," and she was crying. Her father's lawyer shot another objection, but the judge's gavel came down hard. "Overruled." "Continue." Her breath quickened. Because the next memory wasn't blurred or uncertain. It was sharp like glass. The sound of her mother's voice pleading in Thai. The way her father's hand was gripping her arm. And the metallic glint of something half hidden in his coat pocket. Her chest felt tight, every inhale shallow, as if speaking those words had pulled her back into that rain-soaked night. She could hear it now, the patter of rain against metal, the faint rattle of a loose gutter above the alley. Her mother's voice was sharp and trembling, the Thai words slipping between sobs. James didn't move in his chair, but his eyes, dark, unyielding, seemed to pin her in place. The bracelet bit deeper into her wrist as she went on. "I remember the way he looked at her," she said, each word heavy, deliberate. It wasn't how a husband should look at his wife." The prosecutor took a step closer. "What happened next?" Her mouth went dry. She'd never told anyone. Not the police, not the neighbors, not even her aunt in Bangkok who begged her for details over late-night calls. But now, with the jurors leaning forward, with her father staring like he could stop her heart just by willing it, there was no turning back. "He saw me," she said quietly. Her voice cracked on the last word. "He knew I was there." The memory slammed into her. Her father's head turning, the slow recognition in his eyes, the sudden motion of him shoving her mother toward the shadowed wall. Her mother's cry cutting short. And then the glint again, the metal in his hand, catching the alley's lone light. Someone in the gallery gasped. The judge's face remained unreadable, but he leaned slightly forward. "Miss Craig, what was it you saw in his hand?" Her heart pounded so loud she almost couldn't hear herself speak. "A knife," she said. "And it had blood on it." The courtroom erupted. Murmurs, the scrape of chairs, reporters calling out questions they weren't allowed to ask. But through the chaos, her father just sat there, unmoving. His gaze locked with hers, as if daring her to tell them the rest. The bailiff barked for silence, and slowly the noise ebbed, leaving only the electric hum of tension in the air. Her father's lawyer rose halfway from his seat, as if deciding whether to intervene, then slowly sat back down. It was as though even he wanted to hear what she would say next. She shifted in the witness chair, the wooden edge pressing into her spine, grounding her in the moment. Her throat felt raw. I didn't move," she said softly, her eyes unfocused, like she was watching it replay behind her eyelids. "I just stood there in the rain and I thought, if I stay quiet, maybe he won't see me again." But he had. The image came sharp. His slow steps toward her, the knife disappearing into his coat pocket, the wet sound of his shoes on the gravel. She could still smell the faint sweetness of durian from the crates stacked nearby, mixed with a metallic tang of blood. "When he reached me," she continued, her voice trembling now, "he put his hand on my shoulder." She could feel it even now, the weight of it, the way his fingers curled. Not tight, not rough, but with a strange, deliberate calm. And then he said something she'd never been able to forget. The jurors leaned in. Her pulse thudded in her ears. He said, "Some truths will drown you if you let them out." Gasps rippled again through the room, but her gaze didn't leave his. Because she could see it in his expression. He knew she still hadn't told them everything. Not the most dangerous part. The silence in the courtroom pressed against her like a weight, heavy enough to steal her breath. Her father's stare was unflinching, almost daring her to cross a line she couldn't come back from. She felt the jurors' eyes on her, the prosecutor's quiet anticipation, the way the gallery seemed to lean forward as one. Her fingers trembled against the silver bracelet, its edges biting into her skin. She had carried the rest of this secret for years, buried so deep she thought it might never surface. But now the words clawed their way up, unstoppable. "That night," she said, her voice low but clear, "I didn't go home after he told me that." The prosecutor took a step closer. "Where did you go, Miss Craig?" Her gaze flicked to the far corner of the courtroom, where a single man sat apart from the others, his arms folded, his face half shadowed by the brim of a baseball cap. He'd been there every day of the trial. She didn't know why. Or maybe she did, and that was the part that terrified her. "I went to the river," she continued. "The one by the old Thai temple outside the city." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "I thought I was alone. But there was someone waiting for me." The man in the cap shifted slightly, just enough for her to see the faint scar along his jaw. Her chest tightened, 'cause she knew that face. She had seen it once before, standing beside her mother in that alley, just moments before everything went dark. Her breath hitched, the room around her shrinking until all she could hear was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the pounding of her own heartbeat. The scar on his jaw seemed sharper under the courtroom light, a pale slash against tanned skin. He didn't look away when their eyes met. If anything, he leaned back slightly, like he was settling in to watch her decide whether to speak his name. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Miss Craig, who was waiting for you at the river?" Her lips parted, but her gaze flicked to her father. His jaw was tight now, the mask slipping, something cold and dangerous flashing just beneath the surface. She knew that look. It was the same one from the alley, the one that said, "I can end this before you even finish your sentence." Her fingers dug into the bracelet until she felt the skin break. She tasted iron in her mouth from biting her lip, but she didn't stop. "It was a man," she said slowly, deliberately. "And he called me by my Thai name." The jurors shifted in their seats, sensing the weight in her words. She drew in a shaky breath. "He told me he knew what I'd seen, and that if I wanted my mother to be found, I had to follow him." The man in the cap tilted his head slightly, as if amused, his scar catching the light again. Her stomach nodded. Because what came next wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about the night she disappeared for hours, and never told a soul where she'd been. She could still feel the wet grass beneath her shoes that night, the river's slow current glinting under the dim light of the temple lanterns. The man's footsteps had been steady, unhurried, like he already knew she would follow. And she had. Not because she trusted him, but because some part of her knew he was the only link left to her mother. In the courtroom, her hands trembled in her lap, hidden from the jury's view. "He led me through the temple gates," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were closed for the night, but the monks didn't stop him." The prosecutor's brow furrowed. "You're saying they knew him?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the scarred man in the back. "Yes," she said slowly. "They knew him. And they knew me." The memory tightened around her like a noose. Walking past the prayer hall, hearing the soft rhythm of chanting inside, the faint scent of incense and candle wax heavy in the air. The man had stopped beside a small wooden door she'd never noticed before. He told her that behind it was something she needed to see. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I went inside," she said. The jurors were leaning forward now, some holding their pens above their notepads, frozen mid-scribble. "What did you see, Miss Craig?" the prosecutor asked. Her eyes flicked to her father. He sat utterly still, his hands folded, his stare fixed on her as though he could drag the words back into her throat. Her pulse thundered. And when she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "My mother's scarf. And it was covered in blood." A wave of murmurs rolled through the courtroom, sharp and restless, until the judge's gavel struck like a gunshot. "Order," he commanded, but even his voice couldn't cut through the heaviness settling over the room. She kept her eyes locked on the prosecutor, refusing to glance back at her father, or at the scarred man whose stare she could still feel like a blade against her skin. Her fingers curled tighter around the bracelet, the metal warm now from her grip. The prosecutor's voice was measured, but there was a current beneath it. "Miss Craig, was anyone else inside that room?" She hesitated, her chest rising and falling too quickly. "Yes," she said finally. The word felt like a stone dropping into deep water. The jurors shifted. "Who?" Her gaze flickered to the memory, the dim lantern light spilling into the small wooden chamber, illuminating not just the scarf, but the figure kneeling beside it. A man in saffron robes, head bowed, his hands clasped as though in prayer. But when he looked up at her, she saw no warmth in his eyes, only a kind of knowing, as if he had been expecting her. "It was one of the monks," she said quietly. "One my mother trusted." The prosecutor took a step closer. "Did he say anything to you?" Her throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. "He told me that the scarf wasn't the only thing they kept." The scarred man in the back straightened in his seat. Her father's jaw clenched so hard she thought she heard the faint crack of his teeth grinding together. And in that moment she knew. If she told them what the monk showed her next, the trial wouldn't just be about her father anymore. It would drag the whole temple into the light. Her pulse pounded so hard it drowned out the faint rustle of papers and shifting feet in the courtroom. The image was burned into her mind. The monk's slow rise from the floor, the way his robes whispered against the wooden boards as he moved toward the back of the room. He had looked over his shoulder once, as if to be sure she was following. In the courtroom, she could still feel the damp chill of that night clinging to her skin, the smell of river water, incense, and something metallic that made her stomach turn. "He unlocked a chest," she said, her voice trembling. "It was old, carved with lotus flowers. I remember running my fingers over them when I was little, but I'd never seen it opened before." The jurors leaned in, every pen poised. "What was inside?" the prosecutor asked. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking for just a second toward the scarred man. He didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if he already knew what she was about to say. "A necklace," she whispered. "It was my mother's. She wore it every day." The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Was that all?" Her voice dropped lower. "No. There was a small bundle wrapped in red cloth." The monk's hands in her memory were slow and deliberate as he unwrapped it, the folds parting to reveal something that made her chest seize even now. She clenched the bracelet on her wrist so tightly her nails dug into her palm. Inside the cloth had been a photograph, creased, worn but unmistakable. A photograph of her father. But he wasn't alone. In the picture, he stood beside the scarred man at the back of the courtroom. And between them was her mother. Her breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The photograph was as vivid in her mind now as it had been that night. The edges frayed, the colors faded, but the faces sharp enough to cut. Her mother stood between them, her smile tight, her eyes holding a tension that the 10-year-old version of her hadn't understood. Now she did. In the courtroom, she forced herself to keep looking at the prosecutor, not her father, not the man in the back. "Yes," she said finally, her voice almost breaking. They knew each other. Long before that night. The jury reacted in small, restless movements, shifts in posture, glances exchanged, pens scratching in uneven bursts. The prosecutor's voice was steady, but she could hear the undercurrent of urgency. "Miss Craig, do you know when this photograph was taken?" She shook her head slowly. "The monk wouldn't tell me," she said. "But he said something I've never been able to forget." Her hands were cold now, even as the bracelet burned against her skin. "He told me that the night my mother disappeared wasn't the first time the three of them had been together. And it wouldn't be the last." A ripple of unease passed through the gallery. The scarred man leaned forward just slightly, elbows resting on his knees. His gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. The prosecutor took another step. "Miss Craig, did you see this man again after that night at the temple?" She hesitated, because answering would force her to admit something she'd kept buried for years. That she had seen him again. And that the second time, she hadn't been alone. Her throat tightened as the memory uncurled in her mind. Slower this time, heavier, like it had been waiting for years to surface. The second time she'd seen the scarred man, it wasn't by chance. It was in the glow of a street lamp outside her apartment, years later, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt. "I saw him again," she said, her voice low, steady. "It was 5 years after the trial started, and I wasn't alone." The prosecutor's brows drew together. "Who was with you?" Her eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat, toward the jury box before settling back on him. "My daughter," she whispered. The reaction in the courtroom was instant. Gasps, chairs scraping faintly, the low hum of voices rising before the gavel cracked down. She could feel her father's stare hardening across the room, the kind of stare that made the air between them feel sharp. "He knew her name," she continued, the words pushing out like stones from her chest. "He called her by it. And then he told me, she looks just like her grandmother." The prosecutor's voice was measured now, each word deliberate. "Miss Craig, why have you chosen to tell us this now?" Her gaze shifted, past the prosecutor, past the judge, to the scarred man still seated in the back. Because he was smiling now. Not wide, not obvious, but enough for her to see it. Enough for her to know he understood what was about to happen. She drew in a breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "Because," she said softly, "if I don't, she'll be next." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. And in that stillness, her father finally looked away, down at the table, while the scarred man's smile only deepened. The judge's gaze lingered on her for a long, unbroken moment before turning to the prosecutor. "Proceed," he said, though his voice carried something heavier now. Caution, maybe, or the awareness that they'd stepped into territory no one in that room had expected. She steadied herself in the witness chair, though her pulse still raced. Her eyes moved to her father again. For the first time since she'd entered the courtroom, he looked smaller. His shoulders curved forward, his hands clasped tightly, his jaw no longer set in stone. He didn't meet her eyes. "The monk at the temple," she began slowly. "He told me there were things I didn't want to know, that if I pulled too hard on the truth, it would pull me under with it." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I think I understand now. It was never just about my mother's disappearance. It was about the people connected to it. The people still walking free. She glanced toward the scarred man. He hadn't moved, but there was a stillness about him now, different from before. It wasn't patience anymore. It was readiness. I've spent years afraid, she continued, watching every shadow, every stranger who lingered too long. And I'm done. Her words seemed to hang in the air, too heavy to fall. The prosecutor's expression tightened, sensing the shift. Miss Craig, he said carefully, are you saying you believe your daughter is in danger from the same people involved in your mother's case? Her breath caught, but she forced herself to nod. Yes. And if this court doesn't stop them, no one will. The jurors were still silent, but she could see it in their faces. They understood this wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a warning. Her father finally lifted his head. And when their eyes met, she couldn't tell if what she saw in his face was fear or surrender. The judge leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice calm but edged with gravity. This court will recess for 1 hour, he announced, his gavel striking once. Counsel approach. The sound echoed in the room, breaking the stillness, but she didn't move from the witness chair. Her gaze remained on her father as the attorneys shuffled toward the bench. He was still watching her now, though the fight in his eyes seemed dimmer, replaced by something she had never seen in him before. Acceptance, or perhaps the weight of something he could no longer protect. The bailiff gestured for her to step down, but she hesitated. The scarred man rose from his seat in the gallery, slow and deliberate, his boots tapping softly against the floor. He passed by without a word, his presence cutting through the air like a cold wind. For a heartbeat she thought he might stop. Instead he tilted his head ever so slightly, an unspoken message she didn't yet understand, and walked out through the heavy courtroom doors. She turned back toward her father. He didn't try to speak. But as the bailiff guided her toward the hallway, his lips moved, silent, just one word. Her name. It landed in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. For a moment, she was a child again, standing barefoot in the kitchen, her mother's laughter in the air. Then the memory dissolved, replaced by the echo of the gavel, the faint scent of incense still clinging to her mind, and the knowledge that the story wasn't truly over. Because somewhere beyond those courtroom walls, the people who had taken her mother were still out there. And now they knew she was coming for them.